We're going to temporarily have a quick gallery here, so I want to welcome everybody to the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition meeting today. This is both our January meeting as well as our annual meeting for the year. And for those of us joining us primarily to get information and see our program, I will tell you that the business meeting portion of this we believe will be very brief. So I have some information up on the screen just about who we are and some of our contact information. If you are on our mailing list, we do try to get you some notice when we have meetings, and we typically have a public meeting on the third Thursday at 8 a.m. if you want to be aware of that. This is the map basically of what we mean by West Central Wisconsin from a point of view of the West Central Wisconsin Rail Coalition. And I guess I didn't introduce myself. My name is Scott Rogers. I'm the Vice President Governmental Affairs at the Eau Claire Area Chamber of Commerce, and I also am currently serving as chair of the board of directors of this organization. But if you look at this map, essentially the counties from Eau Claire and Chippewa west to the state line and St. Croix River are what we consider West Central Wisconsin for purposes of the Rail Coalition and working on passenger rail services and the corridor along the Union Pacific. And then our mission is to provide leadership and cooperation to develop passenger rail service really from an economic standpoint as part of a balanced transportation system. So what we're going to do this morning is we are going to have a brief annual business meeting. Then we'll have an update on our Rail Coalition priorities. And then we have a guest speaker this morning, Arun from the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, the passenger rail manager. We did learn that just because of his schedule, it's going to be closer to 8:30 when he can join us. So we'll have our annual business meeting and then have an update on some of our priorities and what's happening. And we had a robust discussion of that at our last board of directors meeting recently. So I'm going to call the business meeting to order. And we basically have a couple items of business, and then we'll move on to, so we're going to move on. And what I'm going to do until Arun joins us is go through a few things regarding our priorities as an organization going forward. So what we want to do is summarize kind of for people what we see as the options for fulfilling the mission we talked about earlier, to have passenger rail connections for our West Central Wisconsin corridor. That includes the thing we've been working on for actually now for quite a while, and that is frequent regional service between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities, a corridor with several trains a day. That's something we've been working on. Something that's increased in feasibility and perhaps sooner than we had thought is the idea of additional TCMC stands for Twin Cities, Milwaukee, Chicago. It's being used in talking about that corridor. Additional trains on that corridor that may operate via our corridor through Eau Claire with future development of that corridor with more frequencies based on the FRA Midwest plan that was released last year. The IIJA, which is the Bipartisan Infrastructure bill that was passed, and other things that are leading to that corridor getting beefed up service. And then also Thruway shuttle connections from our corridor cities to existing Amtrak stations, such as a direct shuttle from the Chippewa Valley to Toma to connect with trains there. So we see those as the three most likely possibilities that we're working on for passenger rail service to our region. So the immediate corridor, Eau Claire to the Twin Cities, we see the map here that shows that. That is actually incorporated into the Minnesota rail plan, which I do know they're in the process of updating that. But Minnesota, when they developed their rail plan and have updated at least once, identified Eau Claire to St. Paul with 4 trains a day as a primary phase 1 corridor because of the amount of traffic between our communities. Also, this is a map from the current Wisconsin State Rail Plan, which is also in the process of being updated, and you can see it shows future connections as through future traffic from Chicago, Milwaukee, and onto the Twin Cities with routes both through Eau Claire and La Crosse. And in fact, most recently with the discussion of a national program to expand passenger rail service, you may have seen that Amtrak released this map of, if it were involved, what kinds of services it would suggest including. And when you focus in more closely on that map, you see the service through our region, through Eau Claire, Menominee, and Hudson River Falls Station, including that. And in fact, they have a page on their website now with more detail as to what that service might look like if it were implemented. And then finally, the Federal Railroad Administration released a long-term regional rail plan network last October, in which they identified Chicago, Milwaukee, Madison, and the Twin Cities as one of the highest potential corridors in the nation for frequent and higher speed service. So those all point towards a potential federal investment for our region. And finally, I will say that one of the things that initiated the Rail Coalition a number of years ago is when the state of Wisconsin was one of the leaders in the Midwest Regional Rail Initiative. And at that time, the one thing that our region would have gotten under that plan was a shuttle from Eau Claire to Tomah. We've gone somewhat full circle there, but we see this as a first step, and that is Amtrak, Wisconsin, Minnesota, and Canadian Pacific have agreed to start a second train on the current route. That's where they call that the TCMC project. As part of that project, this is a map that WSDOT has showing that they would include connections to places like Madison, Eau Claire, and Rochester that are not directly on the route, but that would benefit from direct shuttles. And in fact, we had Arun with us a few months ago at a meeting, and he showed us this potential timetable where if we had a shuttle from Menominee and Eau Claire, for example, to Tomah, once the second train is also operating, and if there was one also operated to connect with the current Empire builder, you could, for instance, leave Eau Claire at 1:18 in the afternoon with an Amtrak ticket, take the shuttle to Tomah, take the train the rest of the way to Milwaukee or Chicago. So that's another thing we're working on that we think can move forward. So that's kind of explaining what those are. And at our last board meeting, we went through a list of some things that we need to pay attention to try to move us in that direction. One is finalizing the organization of the Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission and developing a work plan to support passenger rail connections to our region. Clarify the potential options on the role of local governments and develop bi-state cooperation with Minnesota entities. We had 3 counties and 6 municipalities pass resolutions to get the commission started. Members have been appointed to the initial organizing group. That's being worked on. We've had a pause over the winter, and Eau Claire County is coordinating the work here, and we expect to have our next commission meeting in the near future to finalize organization and to begin putting a work plan together. Another item is to explore new public-private partnership options for corridor implementation, including things like value capture options for transit-oriented development. The latter is taking advantage of station sites and the economic activity there to help make the passenger rail service possible. We've been working on having a private partner. The private partner that we had been working with for some time, turns out that is not going to be able to move forward. And so we are actively looking for other alternatives there. Another is working with Wisconsin and Minnesota DOTs and other appropriate parties, including the Federal Railroad Administration, as it begins its corridor identification program mandated under IIJA. Without doing a full kind of review of what was in the bipartisan infrastructure plan, one of the key things that's going to happen there is they've charged the Federal Railroad Administration with working with state DOTs and other entities to identify what corridors will get priority for federal funding. And so it'll be important that the Chicago to Twin Cities corridor, our local corridor, get consideration there. So we'll be staying on top of that. And then participation and feedback on the state rail plan as it progresses. Wisconsin is working on a new state rail plan update, and hopefully Arun will have an update on that for us, but we're going to want to make sure that we're well represented in that plan. So this is an example of the resolutions that were passed, and these are the counties and the municipalities that have agreed to be part of the Chippewa-St. Croix Chippewa-St. Croix Rail Commission. A few other things to go through, and then if we have some time, we'll have some Q&A if Arun hasn't joined us yet. There are some studies and other work that needs to be done, facilitating and or cooperating in key ridership and track and operating studies, both for the Eau Claire to Twin Cities corridor, as well as further development of the full corridor to Chicago and Milwaukee. Some of those cover the same territory, so it would make sense to have some coordination. This is the study that did get underway last year and was put on hold, and we are looking for ways to continue that, as well as to get some contemporary ridership studies. We also want to be part of facilitating and supporting initiatives to directly connect St. Paul and Minneapolis. Our initial plan has been talking about going to St. Paul, but we all know that Minneapolis is a very significant destination, and it's been widely recognized in Minnesota and even in Wisconsin that completing the connection between those two cities and having the various services that serve the Twin Cities, serve both of those cities, is going to be important. And those of you who've been following our issue, you may know that there is a junction just east of St. Paul Union Depot called Westminster Junction that does need some infrastructure work to smooth the flow of passenger service through there, as well as improving freight service. And that project will need to move forward if we're going to see multiple frequent services in our region. Other priorities: exploring funding options and complementary ridership sources for the shuttles that we're talking about. I did have a conversation with Arun and with the transit manager at WISDOT last week to talk about how we might be able to look at some ways to get the Chippewa Valley to Toma shuttle going sooner rather than later, and possibly before even the TCMC is implemented. So we want to be looking at that. And then looking at the economic impact of the value of investments in passenger rail as a way to help policymakers understand that, and then address corridor protection and safety issues. Make sure the corridor is protected, make sure that safety issues are dealt with, and we have some current and retired transportation professionals that have been working with us that have some thoughts on this that they can help us with. And then finally, work of the coalition would be to update and enhance our communication and membership efforts, work to inform policymakers of the benefits of passenger rail and how they can advance its implementation, and finally, working with allied groups and constituencies with similar or complementary goals, such as colleges and universities, seniors, disability advocates, transit and rail organizations. I know we have some people on the line with us today who are active in other rail organizations, and obviously, if we can all work together towards some common goals, that will help us. And then all along, we've been looking at examples of things across the country where we can implement them here. Brightline in Florida has been showing how stationary development and real estate can be an important part of the value of passenger rail service and making it happen. Medium-sized city in Illinois with a college called Normal Bloomington has shown that the value of passenger rail service and investments in stations. And then I just have some examples here of other commissions and authorities that either are working on new services or have, like the Northern New England Passenger Rail Authority, have proven to be entities that can be effective in how passenger rail service moves forward. So those are a few things I wanted to share with you as far as our priorities. And I do see that Arun is on the line, but I might just very briefly, is there a question or two about the Rail Coalition priorities? I think we'll go ahead and move forward because we do want to give Arun enough time, and then we will make sure, hopefully we'll have some time at the end. I know he has a hard stop at 9 o'clock, so hopefully we'll have some time for some question and answer. So many of you have met him before, but Arun is the passenger rail manager at Wisconsin DOT. He's been with the department since 2001 and working in passenger rail since 2006. It's also notable that he chairs the States for Passenger Rail Coalition, which are all of the states that work with Amtrak on state-supported services. He's also on the state's Amtrak Intercity Passenger Rail Committee that works on the relationships between Amtrak and those states. And he's also vice chair of the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, which is the 8 states in the Midwest that are working on passenger rail development. So Ron, thank you for joining us, and we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Scott. There might be a little overlap, but I think it'll be good. Provide some more information, piggybacking off of some of the things that Scott was talking about regarding TCMC, et cetera. So I'm going to start with TCMC, just a really quick refresher. I know most people on the call are probably familiar with it, but that is the project, a joint project by WISDOT, Minnesota DOT, the FRA, Amtrak, Ramsey County, Minnesota, and La Crosse County in Wisconsin to add a second daily round trip along that 411-mile corridor. And used by Amtrak's Empire Builder and Hiawatha routes. And really profound impacts on the communities. Although it's just a one round trip additional, it does quadruple schedule choices, the different schedule combinations that people in those communities can make, making more regional trips viable and having a significant economic impact in that way. Provides an eastbound train with greater reliability than the existing Empire Builder service, since the TCMC will only be starting in St. Paul, coming from the west and mostly on CP rail. And then, of course, it'll improve intermodal connections through both states with added schedules that make it more feasible to connect with intercity and shuttle services, air travel, and local transit. Really quick overview, 7.5-hour travel time, combined with the Empire Builder, a morning and midday departures, about 124,000 forecasted riders in the startup year of service. And it says here service is targeted to begin in 2024, but we have some updates, good news updates on that here in a moment. I think you've seen this map before, but this just really emphasizes the population access of the rail corridor, and it's more than just the rail corridor itself. It's part of an intermodal network of intercity buses and the rail service there. You can see 60% population of both states are within 30 miles of a TCMC station or 15 miles of a proposed TCMC connecting shuttle, which of course includes the Eau Claire area. And Scott showed you this slide, but getting at that potential for connecting shuttles, what a connecting shuttle service from Eau Claire area may look like, linking with Toma for trips to and from Milwaukee and Chicago would be most feasible. And you can see sort of that schedule mock-up there. And as Scott said, we are in discussions on different options of how to do this, how to fund it, both with state, local, and maybe Amtrak participation if possible. And this is something that, even prior to the TCMC rolling, is something to look at even with the existing Empire Builder service. The TCMC railroad infrastructure improvements that are needed to add the additional trains. You can see here a little over $53 million of infrastructure improvements in the La Crosse area, significant $12 million improvement in the Yard and Depot area, La Crescent, Minnesota, Winona, Minnesota, and a small improvement to an Amtrak facility in St. Paul. And this is made possible through those capital improvements through that second bullet there, the FRA Consolidated Railroad Infrastructure Safety Improvement Grant, CRISI grant, which WSDOT applied for, competed for, and was awarded 31.8 million, 60% of the cost. Also, the equally important is the first grant there, the FRA Restoration and Enhancement Grant Program, which was also a competitive discretionary grant program that WSDOT applied for the TCMC, which provided $12 million for the first 3 years of operating. So it's for that ramp up period as the service is starting, provides that operating support assistance so that it reduces the burden on the states. And this was really, I think, critical in getting broad support in moving this forward. And we actually applied for this operating support grant before the CRISI grant as an intentional strategy, because we knew how important that operating support would be. Capital costs and funding. You can see about 41 million of the improvements are in Minnesota, about a little over 12 in Wisconsin in the La Crosse area. And you can see the funding split there. Amtrak is putting a significant funding match here of 5 million, along with Minnesota's 10 million, which is now secured, and WSDOT 6.5 million, and along with the CRISI grant for those infrastructure improvements. So we have made a lot of progress to date, including a lot of progress since I last presented to this coalition on moving the TCMC to implementation. Obviously, we have all the infrastructure needs and preliminary design and costs completed, service development plan completed, public outreach, environmental clearance is complete. We have the federal grants and the state funding matches are secured. We have the railroad agreement with CP Rail, which is a very important, critical piece to operate that. And that railroad agreement, had us operating the TCMC once those infrastructure improvements are complete. And those were scheduled to be completed in 2024. But they're just before the holidays, CP and Amtrak reached a comprehensive agreement on Amtrak services and initiatives on CP Rail right away. And one of the there's a lot to unpack in that agreement. And that will be a public record here soon, if not already. It's going to be filed with the STB as part of the CPKCS merger case that is in front of the STB. But one of the elements in that agreement was that CP and Amtrak agreement to begin TCMC service prior to those projects, the construction being completed, as long as there is an additional agreement guaranteeing the completion of those projects. So as soon as all parties are ready, that service could begin. So it could be, a year or so sooner than anticipated. We don't have a date yet. There's a lot of factors at play there, but with a 60-day notice, in terms of the railroads, this CP Rail, the host railroad, we could start the service. So for the TCMC project, a final design of those railroad improvements in 2022, construction in 2023 and 2024, with service originally planned in 2024, but now could be anywhere from late 2022 to 2024. So very good news there. Amtrak Hiawatha service, quick update here. I think everyone's familiar with this. This is the only state-supported route in Wisconsin, and we fund the operating support 75%, Illinois 25. 7 round trips daily, 89-minute travel time. Serves that intermodal station in Milwaukee, key for those intercity bus connections. And then Milwaukee Mitchell International Airport, Sturtevant Glenview, and Chicago Union Station. Before the pandemic, record ridership, covered 85% of the costs with fares, which was one of the best in the nation. Ridership now is at 50% of pre-pandemic levels. It was growing quite slowly, but and the travel patterns have changed as you'd expect. And with the Omicron, you know, that kind of set things back a bit. And there is a temporary service suspension right now, starting on Monday through March 27th, reducing the service by 2 round trips to 5 round trips daily. And that is because of serious staffing shortages at Amtrak, because people are out with the with COVID, with the and aren't able to come to work until that quarantine period is over. Even despite Amtrak's very, very high vaccination rate, but it's an issue with the mechanical department. They don't have enough mechanical people there to keep up with all the preventative maintenance schedules for the equipment. So it's an equipment issue, and also onboard crew staffing shortages there. So hopefully we'll turn the corner on that soon and be able to restore service before March 27th. On-time performance remains strong at about 92%. The Amtrak Thruway, of course, we have the Interstate 41 bus service now as part of our Amtrak contract that connects those Fox cities in Green Bay to the Hiawatha service in Milwaukee. And ridership was growing slowly, as you can see on that. Obviously, a little bit of a setback now, but around the holidays, Christmas and New Year's period, we saw a big bump in ridership. That's kind of died down now, but hoping that rebounds here soon as we get out of this surge. The Midwest joint state-owned intercity passenger rail equipment efforts are continuing. There's 88 new Siemens Venture next generation cars going, replacing all the Amtrak equipment on Amtrak Midwest routes. And the delivery of those is continuing. Revenue service is going to be starting very soon. I think initially on the Chicago to St. Louis route. No date announced quite yet, but very soon. And then they'll be phasing in across the routes throughout the year here. And eventually that order will equip the Hiawatha with 6 coaches, which is about half of what we need to operate the Hiawatha. So we'd have to use old Amtrak equipment for the other half. But that's why WSDOT is in the process of acquiring some additional Siemens Venture cars so that we have a consistent fleet and we're not having to use the mix in the older Amtrak equipment. This acquisition will get the other 50% of the need, make the Hiawatha consistent with all the Midwest routes, and add 6 Venture coaches, 3 cab coaches as well. And we're going to be introducing business class on Hiawatha service, most likely as well with this order. Expected in service in 2025 for those additional. So moving to the efforts to expand the Hiawatha service frequencies, we're still looking at in the planning for 7 to 10 round trips, but we have to coalesce around the infrastructure improvements, particularly in Illinois, to get all the way up to 10. But in the meantime, we are incrementally building those improvements in Wisconsin so that we can add at least 1 round trip in the not too distant future. But we're still working with the railroads on the solution to the projects in Illinois to get up to 10 round trips. So one of those incremental projects in Wisconsin is expansion of our Milwaukee Airport rail station. And that adds a second platform on the west side with the, that new up and over 2 towers and bridge there you see in the rendering. That's a key project, not only for improving station access and the station operations, et cetera, and Amtrak's operations, but also capacity on the CP rail main line. That'll be complete in early 2024 construction. We're letting that project for construction in August. We have final design pretty much complete here. with February 1st at 90%. And then the other project, we're upgrading signals in Milwaukee Intermodal Station area, 2 miles of signaling upgrade that needs to be done to add trains. And with the completion of this, which is scheduled for 2023, and the airport early 2024, in that CP Amtrak agreement around the holidays, they agreed to add that 8th round trip between Milwaukee and Chicago, which is a very positive breakthrough there. The other big project we have is the freight bypass of Milwaukee Intermodal Station through CP's Muskega yard, which will move most freight out of the station area through this yard, create 2 new mainline freight tracks, really freeing up capacity for passenger trains in the station, improving freight flow, a lot of community benefits associated with this. So where this is now, we're still completing the environmental process. We're at the end, towards the end of it. It should be done soon, and we hope to get into final design this year with construction in 23, 24. So an overview of some plans that are underway, as Scott mentioned. WISDOT is updating its rail plan, and so this new plan will be Wisconsin Rail Plan 2050. It's underway. Public outreach is planned probably late first or second quarter, 2022. So a little bit later than we thought, but that is underway, and please stay tuned for more information on that as that evolves. And then there's the Amtrak Connect Us plan, where Scott showed you the map, and that's a conceptual plan of Amtrak's core development priorities and approach. And as you can see, Wisconsin was very well represented in there. It includes a number of routes that have been in the plans for a long time, including through Eau Claire. And I think Amtrak is looking at doing a deeper dive into some of these Connect Us plan routes all over the country. So they're going to be advancing further analysis of that. And then there's a FRA Midwest Regional Rail Plan, which came out in October, which includes a very high level overview of where the FRA, in collaboration with stakeholder involvement, think that the future corridors would be most effective. And the Midwest Interstate Passenger Rail Commission, or MIPIRC, on which Scott and I serve, is working on a follow-up plan to that, to dive deeper into the Midwest routes and prioritize corridors for incremental improvements. So MIPIRC will be it will be applying for a grant here, hopefully in the near future for that, and playing an expanded role for moving passenger rail forward in the region. Infrastructure bill, just a quick review here of what that means. That's $66 billion for rail over 5 years. As we've seen, we've been applying for discretionary grant programs in the past few years. Those programs are going to continue, just with a lot more funding behind them to move these things forward. And states can apply, local regions can apply, and Amtrak can apply. So really broad eligibility and much higher amounts over the next 5 years. Hopefully be able to move some significant projects forward. Now, in addition to that, Amtrak's getting $16 billion for the non-Northeast Corridor National Network. I didn't put what they're getting for Northeast Corridor here. I thought this would be of more of interest. So that the focus of that $16 billion is on state of good repair for Amtrak to update equipment, replace equipment, national asset stations, et cetera. But there's also a portion of it, about 10%, that can go towards corridor development and capital. So Amtrak will have more ability to do some capital projects to move things forward. But for the most part, it'll be states, Amtrak, locals competing for those discretionary grant program funds that are above there. $3 billion for grade crossing safety improvements, which can have significant impacts for both passenger and freight rail and communities across the country. A lot of opportunity there. And there is a current notice of funding opportunity. This is not part of the infrastructure bill. This was from 2021 program, federal program of the Federal State Partnership Discretionary Grant Program, and that's due March 7th. The states are looking at the possibility of doing an application to help with some equipment overhauls, locomotive overhauls, et cetera, that are needed. But nothing else planned for WISTOT on that program, at least at the moment, for that March 7th program. But we are looking at the infrastructure bill programs and planning for what we want to do there. And with that, I can take any questions.
If anybody has any questions, Ron, I'm going to ask you one right away. Among the Samtrack service reductions are the Empire Builder also is going to 5 days a week. That would seem to be a little bit of a setback, especially for the Twin Cities corridor, because there'll be 2 days a week. I think it's Thursday and Friday westbound and Saturday and Sunday eastbound. There'll be no train. I do know in the past, sometimes when there's been an issue out west, Amtrak has run a short train between Minneapolis and Chicago. Do you know if there's been any discussions of doing that, or maybe doing that before March 27th if crews become available?
We are there. I mean, both Minnesota and WISTOT have brought up this concern. Exactly what you said too is, what are the opportunities to minimize this disruption, again, by running a short train? And they indicated that, it's the problem is in, even if it's a short train, with the issue in Chicago and Winona and St. Cloud crew bases, their crew bases for the Empire Builder. Again, they don't have enough staff to keep all that equipment running and all those onboard sufficient onboard crew, even for a short trade. But we're going to keep communicating with them on that to see what can be done. I mean, hopefully the whole, we'll get back to the regular 7 round trips before March 27th, 7 days a week before March 27th. But in the meantime, we're gonna, I mean, it's definitely a bit of a, I don't want to say setback, but a little bump in the road, since there's a lot of national attention on this corridor now with the TCMC project. Yeah, that's a good question.
If anybody has any questions, maybe if you can use the raise your hand function. Ron, you might, if you do stop screen sharing, we'll get the gallery back too. And we might be able to see if somebody raises their hand or.
I'm raising my hand, but I can't see it, so.
Okay, we don't see you, Jackie, but we can hear you. So if you got a question, go ahead.
Well, I am on here and I have quite a few questions, but at least I'd like to start with a very general kind of thing. I have done my own research here too, and I've read the existing plans, Connections 2030 and 2050 and Minnesota State Plan and all of that, and do some comparisons. But I must say my main disappointment falls in 2 areas. It's very hard to find timelines, regarding these projects and how they connect. I like the fact that the coordination, the Amtrak plan comes into play here as well. And the public involvement aspects, and you mentioned it yourself, Arun, regarding the fact that you're behind a little bit here, because I can remember when Diane Peroni was here, and that goes back, the first letter that I saw was in August of 2020. Then we had that meeting in February of 21, but nothing since then at that point in time in terms of involvement or questions or etc. And in comparison of our last meeting and this meeting, we're kind of at the same issues, same things. And I must say, I listened to the Minnesota, the regional, the Midwest Regional Rail Plan, that was put on by Rick Harnish's group and etc. My main disappointment there falls that Eau Claire isn't mentioned. We're using the old Empire Builder and etc. and including Madison, Milwaukee, which is really pretty obvious, but we're also going to Fox Valley and Green Bay and over. And so that came as a little surprise to me as well, given the history of this startup, and looking at the connection between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities and recognizing the value of that connection. So I'm wondering how we get to put this all together. I know that the 2050 is in draft form, so it's very difficult to find the timelines or even references to old reports or old studies that are continuing to follow through here. And so I'd like to, in a more broader sense, get a little handle on it if I could. And the question isn't framed that I can ask one specific one, except the other thing that you mentioned that had value to me was, that FRA funding, and you're looking at a corridor, which would be, obviously, stands out, and to find that funding where you want to go with it. But Eau Claire, if it's not on that map, I don't know how that corridor is going to be selected. So that would be another issue for me as well. So there are some of my questions.
Yeah, let me see.
And it's a pile, I know.
Yeah.
But you can select any which one way you want to go.
Well, let's see. I'll start with the FRA plan. That's the one you're referring to, where Eau Claire is not specified. Yeah, so that is really a very high level plan using FRA's Connect model, which is looking at very broad level network and doesn't get down to the route alignment level. And so that's why there's this general stick line sort of going to Minneapolis, St. Paul. So it doesn't specify, whether that's going through La Crosse, Eau Claire, or anywhere. So I think that's the next level of study that would happen, that MIPIRC will be looking at, but also the state rail plan that's underway. And then getting to the state rail plan, I think I can talk to Diane and see about the possibility of getting an update to this coalition. It's just the time frame of that, for a variety of reasons, has been drawn out, which is, but there will be some more public outreach for sure. So there's no reduction in the amount of public outreach or comment opportunity or anything associated with that. So that's for sure going to happen and be there. But I can talk to them to see what and to Scott to see about the opportunities to get an update.
Appreciate that.
Great. Other questions? I see Susie's hand raised.
Thanks. Hello, Arun. Thank you so much. Man, you're what is the word? Not a rocket ship. You're just a high-powered engine. Just Wisconsin rocks. Great work. I'm so excited. On the looking at this from the Minnesota side, I have two questions. First, from your standpoint, what asks financially are in? We've mentioned, of course, the connector Westminster Junction, the critical center of the pretzel for my state. What specific asks are needed on the Minnesota side financially for your project, just the corridor?
That's good.
For the TCMC corridor?
No, actually, sorry, I should be more clear.
For
Eau Claire.
Oh,
TCMC's, that baby's got the bottle and is sucking great.
Yeah.
I'm so pleased. Yeah. Now we're looking for the other baby.
Great.
Yeah. Well, I think as I think there's more analysis needed, and Minnesota might be able to answer that as well. But as Scott said, the big area there is the Westminster Junction, as you mentioned, and then also, as Scott alluded to, the connection between St. Paul and Minneapolis will obviously be important in getting that Minneapolis market. There's a lot of work I think needed there to make that connection feasible. So those are, in terms of on the Minnesota side, probably,
those are the two.
Those are probably the two areas. But I can't really, speak very well to that. That's just,
You know, I bold to ask the question just because of the history of close collaboration between our two, particularly the DOTs on the two states. I must say, I was disappointed that Minnesota Department of Transportation's priorities for the governor included 16 priorities. Number 15 was rail, and it only included the NLX.
Yeah,
That does address
I
part of
agree.
the cost, but I'll be working on our side to feed all the babies. Thank you.
great, thanks.
Okay, does anybody else have, yeah, Jeff?
Yeah, good morning, Arun. How are you?
Morning, good, how are you?
Good, good. Long time no see. Three questions I have. Number one is, who is doing the rail plan update? Is that internal staff to WSDOT, or have you hired an outside consultant?
It's mostly internal staff to WSDOT, but there's consultants hired for pieces of it, parts of the public outreach support,
Sure.
et cetera, but mostly, yeah, staff.
And is the state planning on any face-to-face PIMs, public information meetings, or anything like that in the future? I know COVID has screwed everything up, but you know, if it turns around, are you planning on any regional visits?
Yeah, so there is another round of the public outreach, and some meetings is planned, but I don't know if, I'm not sure about in person.
Okay. As far as the deep dive is concerned regarding future routes in the state of Wisconsin, has there been any action to start initiating a deeper dive into the Fox Valley and the Eau Claire route? I'm saying that is because, you know, that the Eau Claire route was somewhat deep dived with the final recommendation of the La Crosse connection through for future rail. And previous administrations really cut that study short. So it wasn't really completed to its full extent as it should have been. But is there any thought of picking that up at this point again?
Nothing specific that I can, I know, I can say that Amtrak is definitely looking, going to be looking into that, among other things, and looking in that a little further, and then be coordinating with us. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And finally, just as a request, there's a number of studies, the historical studies that have been out there since 1990. I don't know when the 92 when the first tri-state initiative was. I can't find any of those on WSDOT's website. Is there any way that those could be put back out and linked to, or providing someone here the electronic versions of that?
Yeah, we can provide those documents.
Again,
if you could.
Yeah, I'm looking at putting back up the final phase 7 study, the modal divergence study of Chippewa and or Eau Claire, and I believe it was Janesville study.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and that has modal diversion in it too. So I think they're important documents, at least from a baseline reference to work with. So
yeah, we can send those. If you could shoot an email.
I can do that.
Get that too. Yeah,
I can do that. Thank you.
Right, we're just about out of time, but I see Dan Bucks has his hand raised. If you want to unmute yourself and put your hand down and ask your question.
Yes. Well, I will lower my hand here so it doesn't cause confusion. Thank you very much. I'm Dan Bucks. I'm a committee chair with the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority. I'm speaking to you from Missoula, Montana. I would just want to note that we would ask for an opportunity to have a discussion sometime of our planning efforts and advocacy efforts out here in the West. We are working to restore passenger rail from Chicago to Seattle via a version of the former North Coast Hiawatha, and more particularly the North Coast Limited route that it preceded it, out here in this region of the country, which is denied access to the passenger rail service that is available to most other Americans. Anyway, we congratulate you on your work. We'd like to have an opportunity to talk with your coalition further on our efforts and with Mr. Rao. I would note that there will be a study of discontinued Amtrak routes, such as this route, that is called for under the bipartisan infrastructure bill, and there's actually a funding set aside to do something about this. So anyway, I just want to be brief, and we would welcome an opportunity for expanded dialogue with both the state of Wisconsin and with your coalition here. And Scott, thank you for recognizing us on your presentation of the existence of our rail authority.
Thank you, Dan.
Good luck to all of you on your efforts.
Appreciate that. Arun, I know you need to go. Just maybe a wrap-up comment. You mentioned the MIPRC is going to be submitting a grant request, and maybe just briefly talk about what that would do, how that interacts with the FRA's corridor identification program, and how optimistic can we be about having passenger rail service in our region?
Sure. So I do have another 8 minutes I got, so that's good. But first, Dan, it was great to meet you, and thanks for that. And we would love to coordinate with you, meet with you, and talk further. I actually have a question, a quick question for you, Dan. Is if Montana DOT or state of Montana is involved in the coalition there?
Not actively right now, but the state law delegates the passenger rail authority to regional authorities, and the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority stretches along 700 miles of Montana from east to west. We may be the largest regional transportation authority in the entire United States. And so in effect, the state has adopted a decentralized approach. Obviously, passenger rail will need to be updated, will need to be included in the state rail plan, which there's very slow progress on that being made at our state level. But that's the answer is that the state of Montana has largely delegated this authority or this function to the counties through this Rail Authority Act that it has enacted.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, the reason I asked is if, to see if membership in the States for Passenger Rail Coalition would be a good fit. I mean, that's typically only state DOTs membership and joint powers authorities that run passenger rail. But if it's a state is designated to this this regional authority, that might be something we could look into.
Would appreciate that, and that will be would be glad to discuss that with you, because I think we in effect are the active governmental authority on this issue and with the delegated powers.
Great, thanks. And sorry about that, Scott. I could get back to your question here. So the first part of your question was the FRA corridor identification process. And so FRA and how that relates to the MIPRC, I think that will feed into the next MIPRC follow-up study. I think maybe corridor identification might happen either sooner or in tandem with that. FRA is working on coming out with a process for that and criteria. And I think we're going to learn more about that criteria and process in late February. So that's moving along. we really don't know much about it yet, but hopefully by the end of February, we'll know a lot more about that process. And if you could remind me the other parts of your question.
Well, yeah, and I'm just curious about, I think I was curious about the MIPIRC study that it's going to be, if that will help feed into that and help maybe steer the FRA, make sure we're on in the line for those priorities. I guess the other, maybe it was more of a qualitative question, whether you feel comfortable asking it, and based on what we've been seeing happening, how optimistic can we be in West Central Wisconsin about having passenger rail service in our future right now?
Well, I think, that things that you have going in terms of the commission, et cetera, are very positive developments, and also the coordination that you're doing with UP, and the fact that Amtrak's Connect Us plan has the corridor on their map, and that they're looking into some of these corridors. They're going to be looking into some of these corridors in a little more detail, to see what can move forward or what needs to wait, or and when, and et cetera. I think there is, so I guess there's a lot of positive things moving forward, and also with the infrastructure bill, the outlook, I think, for passenger rail is pretty positive right now.
All right, I think we're up against your 8 minutes. I don't
Could
see
I
any-
ask one real
Oh, go
question?
ahead, Bill. Yeah.
We need to know more about the Westminster Junction, and if there's any activity going on there. Susie, if you could tell us, keep us up to date there. Ramsey County's participation, are they working on that at all? That's a real big issue for us.
Forgive me, who is speaking?
That was Bill Anderson.
That was
Thank you.
Bill Anderson.
Thanks, Bill. Do you mean a report just now, or are you, in the future, I can let you know what I know. We're
Sure,
watching.
in the future would be fine. We just need, it's
Vic,
so important to our
critical.
movements here that we do from the private side, that
Exactly.
and we'd like very much for that to continue, to Ramsey County to continue to push for that.
Bravo. Well, we need your support. Thank you. I will report on that.
Good, thank you.
You
All
bet.
right, well, we appreciate Arun being with us today. We'll give him kind of a virtual round of applause, and hopefully we can have some in-person meetings in the coming weeks. But we'll just remind you to, if you are interested in our meetings, mark your calendar for the third Thursday of each month. I think I'm sharing a little bit of our contact information right now, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.